It's very, very important. You may not always succeed. In fact, you may never succeed. But the important thing is you must seek that. You have to.
It's a rare occasion to have Mr. Shyam Benegal to address on behalf of the Sainik School. He's here today speaking on the most important films that have been made in the country. You know, India was known for many, many things like cricket, films, and politics. And films played a very vital role in actually communicating the Indian culture, Indian society. And it also put across many, many, for instance, the built-in psychological framework of the human mind of the society. We have seen a lot of films in India, which were made by very, remarkable directors. Also in Hindi, for instance, we have Naya Daur, Mother India, Kabuliwala, and Shahid. So some of these films were made by distinguished directors in the past. And as we know that, the films which were made mostly in Hindi, they had actors. Why I'm speaking this here is how Shyam Benegal brought a new crop of actors at a time when Indian film industry was ruled by some of the well-known actors like Rajesh Khanna, Dharmender, Amitabh Bachchan, Sanjeev Kumar, and things like this. Shyam Benegal did not much bother. He was so much fascinated by the themes like Ankur, Nishant, and Manthan, and Mandi. I especially like the film Mandi for its various dimensions, various facets, various layers, like music and the structure and many, many things. You see, as a film director, to some extent, I can appreciate. So he brought out, a bunch of actors who were not known at all. There were, and many of them became very popular actors later. For instance, Shabana Azmi, Smita Patel. Of course, Girish Karnad was known for his writing and all that earlier. But as an actor, he had to start with Shyam Benegal's films. And he had made only one that was not popularly known, like, for instance, U.R. Ananthamurthy's book, which was made by Tom Cowan. That was, Mr. Reddy, who directed it. Tom Cowan was a cameraman from Australia. But it was the Shyam Benegal's films which established Shyam Benegal not only as a great filmmaker, as a celebrity, or as an illustrious person, but a person who went beyond many of these parameters. He's known intellectually all over the country and also outside. And anybody, although he has made mostly in Hindi films, he's known all over the country for the kind of films that he has given to us. And at a time when, as I said earlier, the Indian society was, was fascinated by many other actors who came mostly from North India. So this is how I want to begin. And of course, Mr. Ashok Dalwai and Mr. Gopal Hosur wanted me to ask questions like, for instance, how his filmmaking journey began. For instance, as a young boy, even about 5 or 6 year old, he was fascinated by the films like Rama Shastri and another film which I don't remember. So as a kid, as a young boy, he had this inkling in his mind to do something with this. The flip books and all that he talks about is another thing. But the filmmaking is a different kind of a ball game. It's a different kind of an art. It is not just painting or writing a book. It's a composite world. It's a composite art. You have to have an imagination. You have to have thinking. You have to have themes in your mind. You have to be influenced by various images, various actors, various directors, various locations. So all these things, it's a very complex thing, filmmaking. So we have Mr. Shyam Benegal as an outstanding filmmaker. I even think that filmmaker itself is a small word for him. He's much beyond that. He's much beyond that. I have seen he's talking to Satyajit Ray, and I have seen him being interviewed by so many others. So we'll go ahead with this. Let him begin to say how films have made an impact on Indian society. Have they changed the outlook of the people? Have they changed the minds of the people? Have they changed, for instance, his Ankur, which deals with the feudal system, when it was his first film? I just wanted to know whether the film created ripples among the younger students. For instance, when Shabana Azmi was exploited by under this system, and then her husband was being beaten by this man Anant Nag. So, did it create ripples among the student community? Did it create a stir among the certain sections who did not like this kind of a feudal system? So, I just want Mrs. Benegal to go ahead with it. How films have made the films have made an impact on Indian society and on Indian mind. Yes, Mr. Benegal.
Let me start from the very beginning of Indian cinema. It goes back to, in India, cinema came just 3 years after it was invented. So when it was in France, when the first film was made in 1893, we made our first film in 1896, just 3 years. So cinema came to India before it went to many other countries of the world. So actually, cinema is as old as cinema itself in India. It's amazing that we have had this medium to work with from then, and from the last decade of the 19th century. So by middle of 1910, 1915, we'd already started to make films. And it was being used in the beginning as, to record events and various other things that were happening at the time. For instance, the Delhi Darbar that took place when King George V came and all that sort of thing. Now, all that was being filmed. And similarly, immediately afterwards, you had films being made very much like Hollywood was starting to make films at that time. And we had films that were being made, silent films at that time, of course, which actually were being shown to audiences. Dadasaheb Phalke, for instance, when he made his films, and because he was the first filmmaker, we consider him our first filmmaker in India. When Dadasaheb Phalke started to make his films, he gave it a certain kind of genre, which was very interesting. And that was a traditional genre through which a lot of entertainment in India used to go, which was the mythological. Because it started because we use mythologicals were very, very popular in our country, both in rural and urban India at the time. And you had a lot of theater, different kinds of regional theater, as well as Hindi theater and so on and so forth, doing things from the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and from the Puranas and so on and so forth. So the mythological, we began with mythologicals, but what mythologicals required was very interesting, because a lot of things that appeared to be supernatural had to be depicted in the cinema, which meant that Indian cinema was already experimenting with ideas that went way beyond the simple, straightforward, filming of events. It went beyond that. It meant that you had to be creative and do all kinds of different kinds of cinematic, ideas that were not necessarily purely realistic. Now, all this was happening in India when a large part of the world hadn't even started to begin making films. So it's very interesting that we had cinema, which was almost as old as Hollywood, and with the same amount of experimentation and development. So we were really very close to what was happening in the rest of the world as far as cinema was concerned. And this development that went on, very interestingly, came to a sudden halt when sound came into films. The moment sound came into films, the entire manner in which we were telling stories through the cinema, left the cinematic ideas. The cinema has its own grammar. There's a certain visual grammar. There's a certain visual idioms which you use to be able to tell a story or to create a narrative. Now, when sound came, we reverted back to the theater. And having reverted back to the theater, we had to make a whole new beginning all over again. Because when sound came, we went back and started to make films that were more like plays, that were more like the drama, popular dramas of the day. And that is when you suddenly had in our cinema, Indian cinema, something very unique, very different, but also very difficult to handle because we started to have songs in our films, which was nothing, which didn't happen anywhere else in the world. Our stories had songs studded through the storytelling. And this kind of filmmaking became extremely popular. Not only did it become extremely popular, it became a kind of trap in which you were caught. It was a very interesting thing because here we were doing something quite unique, but on the other hand, we were like the man in the iron mask. We were trapped in that particular framework of filmmaking. And this you could not let go of because no distributor, no person who would show exhibitor would want to show a film without songs.
Yeah.
And this was a huge problem.
Yeah.
And so when I started wanting to make films, because I wanted to make films ever since I was 4 or 5 years of age, because my father was a photographer. He had a movie camera, 16 millimeter. He used to show his family's films to his family, meaning he would film his children and so on and so forth, and have these films shown to his own family and friends. And that was the camera that I took to make my very first film at the age of 12. But that's neither here nor there. But I was quite familiar with the cinematic medium. So I was, because I'd already done little things with it and so on and so forth. And I also discovered that there was something like a cinematic language. Now, to go back to the history of Indian cinema, in Indian cinema, the whole idea, the idiom, the grammar of film took a sudden turn because of these songs that would come in between. The way of the storytelling with songs. Now, this was not always properly evolved. There were very few filmmakers who knew how to use songs in films. Because, like everyone, according to me, Gurudat knew how to use songs in his films. There were some other filmmakers also. Mehboob knew how to use songs in films. But not everybody knew. So most of our films were really like entertainments of one kind or another with a whole lot of songs studied, the dances and songs in between to keep audience interest. And the story itself took second place, and we would tell the same kind of melodrama, melodramatic stories and so on and so forth, film after film after film. Now, this was what was happening when I came into the film industry. And at that time, one of the only people who were making films that were different from all of this, one was Mr. Satish Ray, because he'd already started making films in the middle 1950s. Then soon after that came Mrinal Sen, then Ritik Ghatak, which was in Bengal. And there were a couple of other filmmakers in the South as well, because some of the early filmmakers there who had trained at the Pune Film Institute, because the Pune Film Institute had started by that time. So you had people like Adur Gopalakrishnan and people like that who were making films in Malayalam. And then soon after that, oddly enough, you had people in Kannada, Girish Karnad and Anant Murthy's story was made into a film. And those kind of things happen. And they happened in the regional cinema before it happened in Hindi cinema. So by the time I came into wanting to make feature films, at that time, so all these developments had already taken place. So I wasn't any kind of real pioneer. But what to me was important at that time was that as far as Hindi cinema was concerned, they had forgotten how the medium itself, they were really creating a variety program through celluloid. And this had to change. There was no question about it. And this is what I very strongly felt. That is when, I was working on different kinds of things. I was in advertising, I was making advertising films. So I had already learned how to make films because of my practice of making advertising films. So by the time I came to Ankur, I had already made about 350 advertising films. So I've become very familiar with the medium, and which was very important to me because I didn't go to a film school.
Yeah.
So I had to learn filmmaking by myself. Now that is when, when I first wanted to make the film, when I wrote scripts for various films, and I found it was very, very difficult to get money to make those films.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
I find that there is a definite distance between the advertising films and the feature films. For instance, yes, you had learned the techniques of making the advertising films, no doubt, but the advertising films didn't have the kind of the message or the dialogue or the theme, the development of the theme, the imagination, the end of it. Although the goods and services have to be sold by making the advertising films is okay. But then the feature films are not shown or not seen as many times as the advertising films are seen by the people. And advertising can come, in a day about 100 times, they can, release it on the film and or on the TV today, it can be seen. But the feature film is not like that. So you had to perhaps spend more time, more imagination, more thinking, more hard work. And you began making these films at a time when the commercial films were ruling the roost in India. The commercial films were dominating. That was a time when you started making this. I'm not saying that you are the only one, but you are prominently a person who started making the kind of films which were very different from the rest of the other films that were being made, either earlier or at the same time in the industry. So what made you take up this kind of feature films? And I want to know whether you found it as some kind of a blind spot, in making the feature films from the advertising films. What was it that you wanted to make a feature film like Ankur? Yes, but then you must have had certain things in your mind that you had to make this kind of films. So what was it that that was dwelling your mind?
No, definitely. I did want to make films which I felt, represented life in a way that was recognizable, that was experiential for everybody. Not a film in the never, never land. Because the song and dance storytelling was never realistic. And I felt that it was very important that particularly in India, that we should reflect on our life, on the way people lived life in our own country, and not the kind of representation it found in the cinema at the time. Now that was very important. And I felt that this was not happening at all. It was happening in some countries of the world, because you see, Hollywood was ruling the world outside of India. And here it was the Bombay cinema or the Madras cinema that was ruling the country.
Correct.
And all of them, they were not representative of human beings as they lived their lives in the country. So, but in Europe, in particularly Italy, since soon after the Second World War, a certain kind of movement began with young people trying to make films that represented them much more accurately than what Hollywood was presenting.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of what one might call the neorealist cinema in Europe. Italians, particularly,
Right.
the two or three of those filmmakers and a couple of French filmmakers like Jean Renoir and so on, they started to make films of this kind. Those films had a great amount of impact on me at that time.
Yeah.
And the odd thing is, how did those films reach us? Because you see, when I was in college, one of the things was that I would voraciously read anything that came on the cinema. I was much impressed by Satyajit Ray. I'd seen Pate Panchali by that time.
Yeah.
And I'd already seen a few of the films of the neorealist genre, particularly from Italy. Now, having seen Shoeshine and a couple of films like that, it struck me that they represented life much more honestly than what our films did. And having seen all of that, I felt that that is the kind of film I wanted to make. Those are the kind of things that whatever I did, I had to represent our time. It had to be truly the way life was lived in our own country, in rural India as well as in urban India. And so I'd already been writing scripts of different kinds, but I had got no opportunity because nobody was willing to finance these films.
Yeah.
I was taking scripts to producer after producer after producer, which I must have gone to the offices of at least 30 to 35 producers at Bombay, and not a single person showed any kind of interest in what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But at that time, the odd part of it was because for a living I was making advertising films for an advertising agency. And the person who used to distribute those advertising films all over the country was a person called Mohan Bijlani. And Mohan Bijlani had an advertising agency that used to distribute advertising films. And that company was called Blaze. They had an office in Bombay. They also had an office in Bangalore, by the way, and in different cities of the country. Now, we got to, because Mohan Bijlani and I became friends because I was making so many advertising films for my advertising agency. And he one day told me, he said, this is ridiculous that you sit there making advertising films and keep saying that you want to make a feature film. Why the hell aren't you making a feature film? I said, you finance my film, I will make it just now. And, and he said to me, how much money would you require? So I named a figure. And he said, done.
Good.
That's how I made my first film, Uncle.
Yeah.
So when I made it...
You are saying that the European films... Okay.
No, but what was interesting was that, you see, the amount of money he gave to me to make the film was very, very little. But I said, that's not important. The important thing is to make a good film. And I made the film. Because everybody who was in that film was absolutely new. Nobody really concerned themselves with making money. The idea was that we should make a good film.
Absolutely.
And we made the film.
Yeah.
Having made the film, Mohan Bijlani, the advantage was because he was distributing advertising films all over the country, he could find distribution for my film. I was lucky because, you see, at that time, there were other people who were making films as well, but they didn't get this opportunity of getting their films distributed or with any kind of distribution strategy for the films. So in this case, Mohan Bijlani worked out a strategy for the release of these films, but it made it made my career Because you see, through his manner of strategizing the release of the film did a silver jubilee.
Oh, yeah.
I can't believe it. I couldn't believe it myself.
Yeah.
So he, and when I spoke to Mohan Bijlani, he said, "See, you make the films, I make the money. So that's a good deal." Right? So I said, "Okay." But I said, "How will I make my second film?" He said, "I will produce it."
Good.
And after that, he produced 2, 3 of my films.
Yeah.
And then, and the same arrangement continued, which put me on my way. So after that, I had no problems at all. I could continue to make films. So it was, I remember once,
Especially
when
your film,
I
Mandi.
remember saying to me once, he said, "How is it that you're managing to make film after film after film? You and Mrinal Sen are the only 2 people I know who make films regularly. It's very, very rare to do that." So I said, "But how do you do it?" It's the same thing, like you do it, Mrinal is doing it, I'm doing it, so it was possible to do it. But the fact was that you require these breaks. You required those lucky breaks. But you have to be up to it. It isn't as though it will happen just like that. It's not a miracle. You have to be up to it as well. You have to work for it. So anyway, that was the whole process.
Yeah.
But that's as far as I'm concerned. But as far as Indian cinema is concerned, if you look at it, it was a very fascinating period, the 1970s.
Yeah.
Because in Hindi, we were making these films. Then there was an organization that the government of India started called the Film Finance Corporation.
Right. Yeah.
The Film Finance Corporation was developed under the Ministry of Information Broadcasting specifically to help films that were not the run-of-the-mill, that represented the country in a much more realistic way than they did. So, which meant that FFC could finance films not only in Hindi, but in other languages as well.
Yeah, right.
And soon after that, it became the National Film Development Corporation. And then, of course, the rest is history, of course. Anyway, that was the process. So as far as I'm concerned, the process was that for myself, was in this fashion. And which according to me, made a huge difference in perception of the cinema itself. And this happened before television came. Because you see, when television came, the centrality of cinema has gone. It no longer is central to our kind of entertainment.
Right.
Television is far more central to it. And then cinema is an adjunct of it. It's no longer the central part of that kind of entertainment. And therefore, it has had tremendous amount of influence on the kind of films that are being made today. Because a lot of the films, many things have happened subsequently because of television. One, of course, cinema audiences shrank, cinemas closed down. So many things started to happen all over the country. So whoever wanted to work with the audiovisual medium had to primarily think in terms of television. But in television, you couldn't possibly do only the kind of work that was normally, the television serials and things like that. Some people wanted to make films like the cinema films. Now, in order to do that, the whole process of it your optique had to change.
Right.
You looked at things. So that has been happening. That's a continuing process, which is what is happening at this moment in time. But I find that the generation of filmmakers, the younger generation of filmmakers, they are much, much more, I mean, they they know the idiom of film much better than my generation of filmmakers. You know, I mean,
Maybe it could be right, but what I want to say is, yes, the younger generation may be very conversant with the kind of let's say the technological things like maybe editing or using animation or visual photography. I mean, visual effects and all those things. But the kind of a thematic, evaluation or thematic narrative that you want to put across, that you are weaving in your mind. Perhaps that I do not see in the present filmmakers, mindset. I mean, there are some absolutely good filmmakers, no doubt about that. But for instance, now in your film like Manthan, which could have become a documentary, but then you very beautifully made it into a great feature film. It was so very powerful. And from Manthan, if I see Mandi, it's an amazingly beautiful film. Mandi, the kind of music that you have used, the humor that is there, the various kinds of characters, I mean, the logistics and all those things. So, what kind of, for instance, like for instance, the musical background or the literary background, since you are in Hyderabad, you are born in Hyderabad, perhaps you must have had some kind of a bearing in the classical Urdu music or the Hindi music, classical, which you have brought in the various films. Like, for instance, that Kiran, she acts in that Sardari. That's beautifully made, and especially Mandi film must have been a big box office hit, perhaps, according to me. I don't know how it went commercially for you,
well, it
but
went commercially well, but I wouldn't say it was a box office hit. But it was successful. It did
yeah,
return the investment and made a profit for the producers. But it didn't become a kind of huge hit. You know,
right.
in that way, funnily enough, Ankur was a big hit.
Hmm.
Not so much Mandi, you know. But
Yeah,
the odd part of it is it's not the but what has happened over a period of time, according to me, but
hmm.
what you're saying is that they probably today's filmmakers, younger filmmakers, have all this kind of they know the idiom of the time, they know the techniques of cinema better than the
Right,
earlier generation, all of these things. But the fact is that whether then or now, the number of really good filmmakers would not be very much more or very much less, because that has to do with talent, their ability, their imagination, and so on and so forth. That has nothing to do with the amount of knowledge they may have of film. It has to
right,
do it has to do with their talent and their own individual abilities. Now, those abilities have very little to do with how much training they have.
right.
They can have a lot of
Yeah,
training. The innate talent isn't there, then what can you do? But
right.
there are talented filmmakers today, and some of those talented filmmakers, they're making some extraordinarily interesting films. But what they have done, because cinema is no longer what it is, because what it used to be when I started making films, where the primary medium, audiovisual medium, was the cinema, and
Right.
and the means to get to the audience was through the cinema hall. That no longer exists. Now, that to me is a bit of it's not, it's a tragic fact.
Yeah. I want to,
Because,
yeah.
yeah,
I want to ask you about when you had a conversation with Satyajit Ray and
yes,
you made a film. It was a brilliant kind of, I mean, it continued later. He spoke so well about the situations, then how he also found that he had made mistakes in the Pather Panchali. The first half of the film was full of mistakes, he said. But the later half, he realized, then he corrected them. And then the Aparajito was a failure, so he did not know what to do. So he made a comedy film that also did not succeed. So he was telling you that, for months together, there would be no work and there would be no money. But then many of his films, if you look at them, he goes to the core, into the crevices of the human mind and finds out how a character has to be explored on the film. I mean, the details, small details that are very important, I felt, in making the films. He was, of course, influenced by the Western filmmakers that Billy Wilder and all that he spoke about America. And you said Houston and William Wyler, the American film directors, that you were seeing them and they had influenced you. So you were talking about the European films, and I just wanted to know particularly the French cinema. For instance, Francois Truffaut, who wrote a book on Alfred Hitchcock, Francois Truffaut, then Renoir, the man who made Hiroshima Mon Amour. It's a beautiful film. So these are the French filmmakers. A friend of mine, who influenced me by showing the films in Darwin long back. He said that they did not like the Hollywood films in France. And French made a great inroad into the American society also. For instance, about a few years ago, a film that was made on the feminine theme was released after 25 years, and it ran in about 100 theaters in US, they said. So I forget the name of the movie. Anyway, so whether the French filmmakers or Fellini, the Italian filmmaker, you said Italian filmmakers were great. So many of these French and also Ingmar Bergman, the Swedish filmmaker, who's fleshy nakedness of the film, which he depicted in greater, for instance, reality. For instance, as things, for instance, sex. He would depict it in a way it was happening in the real life. That's how they say that he became very successful. And that means even box office wise, he made a lot of money when he brought out some of these themes and put across to the audience. So some of these films, when you said the European films also influenced you, what about the role, the French films? Many of them were great poets, great writers. Francois Truffaut was a journalist, and one filmmaker told him that you don't know how to make a film, so you just keep on writing anything about films. Then he started making a film. So I just wanted to know whether some of these filmmakers also influenced you. Because when I look at your films, like this trilogy, like Ankur, then Manthan and Bhumika, they're extraordinarily different. They're extraordinarily original. For instance, you sway from Hyderabad, like where you made this Ankur, to Manthan, which is in Gujarat, and then Bhumika, which is altogether a different kind of a cultural setting, a cultural background. For instance, the Western Ghat, like Ratnagiri and all that. You have brought out in terms of food, in terms of locations, in terms of logistics, in terms of language. So these are very extraordinary, what should I say, extraordinary things in your films. So whether these things came to you from the Western filmmakers in some of these films, or they were your own imagination?
This didn't come from the watching films. This really came from experience of life, really.
Right.
Because it has to do with one's interest. I've always been very fascinated with our country, with India. With our nation. And
right.
In fact, one of the things that the result of one of these things was Bharatik Coach, which was a 3-hour history of India, television history of India, which I did based on Nehru's discovery of India. But basically, that was the that was a springboard. But essentially, it was history of India. So I consulted probably the best historians alive to get my material for that series. Now, because I've always been seriously interested in our own country.
Yeah.
In many ways, I'm interested culturally, politically, socially. I follow the kind of changes that are taking place in Indian society, both urban and rural. And so it's a subject of huge fascination for me, and it's a lifelong thing.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of the material for my films come from that kind of thing. So I have subjects that I have made to now, for instance, Arohan I made in Bengal.
Yeah.
And like that, I've made films in Rajasthan, I've made films in UP, and I mean everywhere, wherever I can, wherever I find an interesting subject. So the country, it fascinates me. Our nation fascinates me, and it's that I think is a forever fascinating subject for me. Our country is the most fascinating. Therefore, for me, subjects are not a problem. I've never been a problem because I'm fascinated by the entire country. I can go and make a film anywhere.
Right.
And I don't feel, a lot of people say that languages aren't you. I mean, can you make that kind of transition to languages? I don't feel that is a barrier at all.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, no barrier at all. I don't have to necessarily, because I can use the Indian languages that I know. On the basis of that, I can make a film anywhere.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be. That's a myth, according to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that I must make a film in a regional language. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Because in India, we don't necessarily go by languages. It's a political subject more than it's for political reasons that people use that subject. But the fact is, for the regular Indian, he feels at home anywhere in India. I mean, a Malayali goes to Kashmir and he lives there very comfortably.
Absolutely.
Like everybody else. I mean, he doesn't feel that he's in a different part of different part of the world. He is in India. We all know that.
Right. Yeah.
That's the kind of country we are. So that's why for me, the entire, my arena is the whole country,
Correct. Yeah.
of filmmaking. Yeah.
And of course, because this country has fascinated a lot of people even outside. I mean, the outsiders also love this country. And since we have a history, thousands of years ago, when the Chinese came, the Portuguese came, the French came, the Dutch came, because it had wonderful ecology, environment, history, culture, and all that kind of thing. What I want you to, tell the audience, there are a lot of audience who are hearing you today from the Sainik School members who have, flowered into very various branches. I want to tell them, I want you to, because the amount of time, the research and scholarly work, reading, writing, understanding various cultures and languages that you have gone through, filmmaking is not an easy job. That's what I want people to understand. Because Indian films, by and large, like the entertainment films that we have given to the people understand, okay, some songs are there, some fight, some comedy is there, that's the end of it. But when it comes to people like you and Satyajit Ray in our country, perhaps you two are an extraordinarily great filmmakers. There is no doubt about that. So I want people to understand that filmmaking is not a very simple thing. It's a very complex job. I want you to, in your own way, because when Mr. Ashok Dalwai wanted you to, speak about the impact of the films on Indian society, on Indian mind. So these things were at the back of our mind, that why your films affect us so much, why they impact us so much. There are so many films, of course, we remember them, like Mother India, there is the Kabuliwala, but your films are different. Why they are different, of course, you explained to us now. But there is a lot of work which has to go into filmmaking. And it's not a very easy thing. As you were saying, India is a whole arena for you. And then at a time when there were these Hindi films were making a big noise, and you came out in the sense you started making your films, and they made an impact. That's very important. They were not just films like random films, random filmmakers here and there, 2, 3 films they make and then end up. No, you continue to make different kinds, documentaries, serials, and great feature films. Amazing kind of the bunch of films that you have made. So I want these people to understand that how complex and how research-oriented, research-based filmmaking is, if you don't mind.
Not at all. You see, any piece of work that you do, whatever you do, you do need to research. You do
Yeah.
need to go into the details of it. You cannot just sort of skim the surface. Now that's for films particularly, because films deal with life. And since they deal with life, they have the complexities of life and they have the depth of life. All of that has to be constantly explored. It's not just a question of making a film. It's not just telling a story.
Right.
Because,
Yeah.
because story can be told in any which way. But
Yeah.
what is important is you see, it's like what is a really good film is
Right.
not only what you see. It's like an iceberg. An iceberg,
Yeah.
what you see is probably
Sure.
1/4, above the surface of the water. 3/4 of it is under the water.
Yeah. Right.
Now, when you see that on top of the water, but you have to get an indication of what is underneath. In other words, whatever thinking that you have, the important thing is to lead people into the depth of that thinking.
Right.
Because even something that you yourself may not know. So what are you doing when you're making a film? When you're making a film, you are trying to yourself locate that part of the iceberg which you cannot see. That part of the iceberg which is under the surface, which you cannot see. Now, that is ultimately, it's a process of exploration of life itself. And unless you see it like that, you will never get to the depth of anything. It's very, very important. You may not always succeed. In fact, you may never succeed. But the important thing is you must seek that. You have to, because you have to explore what really life is, what is experience. Yeah. All of these things, every single aspect of life, you need to be able to explore it as much as you possibly can through the means of your film, through the means of the kind of story you're telling, through the means of the kind of relations you might have with other people, and so on and so forth. So that is the process. Otherwise, why would one want to make a film?
Yeah.
Why does one want to do anything for your life to live, to feel that you have spent your life has been worthwhile as long as you live? Why should that happen unless you constantly explore it? And that process of exploration has to come in whatever you do. As far as I'm concerned, my means of doing it is through the cinema. And if
Yeah.
I don't expect necessarily that I will achieve too much out of it, but that is the only thing I know. That is the only method I know to try and understand life itself.
Yeah. No, I want certain sections of the society, even the government and also the institutions, to understand that film has to be taught or film has to be studied very seriously. The kind of films that you have made and they make an impact, like you, Satyajit Ray, like Mahanagar and Pather Panchali, these are the films. And they are remarkable in the sense that, as you said, you have to explore every small detail. For instance, in Manthan, for instance, when you introduced for the first time this man, Mr. Nasiruddin Shah, it was such an impact. His one voice, he makes an impact through his presence. He made a wonderful presentation of his own personality. Of course, that is your creation. The way he runs to the railway station to give an idea to Mr. Girish Karnad, by that time the train moves away. These are some remarkable things, like they might, I'm sure, have not come through improvisations. They have been studied and explored definitely by the film director and brought in onto this screen. So the institutions must understand films are not just sources of entertainment. They will go a long way in changing the human mind, the thinking, the process of the life itself. You were talking about, I have heard you saying that the process, you are interested in process, not the outcome of it. In a sense, you compare the process to the sunlight, the shadow of the sun. You don't see lengthening of the shadow. You see only when the shadow is lengthened, not while it is lengthening. Similarly, the process is the same in filmmaking. It involves creativity. It involves hard work. It involves imagination, thinking. It cannot be seen by many people. That's what the film is, all about, I think. So you want, people like you should be able to advise the government to take films in a different way. I don't know, they are giving honors, they give awards and all that, that is true. But by and large, the way films are understood by the people has to be necessarily slightly different from the rest of the society, which takes the entertainment as a source of, just joy.
Well, I agree with you. And of course, as I've done my bit, and I continue to do my bit as far as the powers that we are concerned. You see, but it's a question of more than anything else. I feel that what universities need to do, what schools need to do, what colleges need to do, is to take cinema just as a subject, like you have geography, history, and so on and so forth. Now, we have not used cinema as a subject. We have never thought in terms of having cinema as a subject in school studies. It's like, I need to study language, for instance. If I have to learn English, I have to learn Hindi, I have to learn Kannada. This is a subject in school. I can learn it there. Now, similarly, I need to study cinema. I need to learn about cinema. Well, it is not only content, but it is also form. It's a language. And you have to understand the language of the cinema. And unless you know the language of the cinema, you can never really appreciate it. It's like, literature. How will you appreciate literature? How will you be able to say, make the difference between good literature and trash? It's the same sort of thing. It's very important, and we have not done anything in this area at all. Anywhere, no state in this country has done that, because education is a state subject. And I think schools in our country need to have this as a subject from the word go. You don't have to wait until somebody is 15 years of age or 16 years of age. You can start when you start learning the alphabet. The cinema you can start learning about the cinema at that age. You don't have to be a kind of adult or semi-adult person. That is something that I've always felt very seriously about, that we have not done anything about that. So, it's very important.
Yeah. And see, for instance, you made a lot of actors in your movies, and there are actors in the commercial films. Just by one or two films, they become important. They start, feeling very big. Then they enter politics, some of them. And so these are the things. But whereas you looked at your actors from the point of view of, giving out the best of their talent, their merit, their ability to prove their, involvement in your film. So this is what made your films more important, I feel. You did not take actors just because of their looks or they were very handsome or they were very beautiful. No, you did not bother about that. So this is very important. For instance, you might have made thousands of filmmakers. I mean, your influence must have been on them now because of these qualities which have gone into your filmmaking. For instance, in southern India, we had film stars who became the chief ministers of Tamil Nadu, of Andhra Pradesh, all of them. Anyway, I mean, they were doing mythological films, they became popular and all that. But then films are not only meant to, promote these actors as something extraordinary. Whereas your films don't do that, which I personally appreciate that. I personally I understand.
I should intervene here, if you don't mind. I should intervene here because you see, I feel the medium itself, the medium itself is larger than life.
Right.
You see, because it is larger than life, it makes everybody larger than life. Now, because it is larger than life, because the manner when people see somebody on the screen playing one or another role, they see them in that light. And therefore, it is easy. I mean, whether it is N.T. Ramarao or whoever who went into politics and became very popular, and some of them became chief ministers of their states and so on and so forth. All of that happened. But the fact is, the reason that happened is because, you see, cinema creates a larger-than-life persona. Cinema itself creates a larger-than-life persona. Now, that is an advantage.
Right.
In politics, that's a great advantage. If somebody wishes to use that in their political life, as people have done. And people are aware of it also. That, the audiovisual medium of the cinema is such that everything can be converted to larger than life. And then the way the way you empathize with the characters on the screen is extraordinary. It doesn't happen when you read, and when you read a book, it's not the same thing. When you listen to music, it's not the same thing. When you see somebody, and then you see that person as larger than life, and that is very important.
Right.
That's the thing that cinema does, which is the power of the cinema. And that is what I think is something that many of them are aware of also. Because they're aware of it, they make use of it. And that's why it's been used by politicians very frequently.
Right. There is nothing wrong in getting into politics. I'm not saying it's wrong, but then if they come into politics, they should be able to deliver. Because unfortunately, a country which is going through a lot of processes in the last 20, 25 years now. So I wanted to talk to Mr. Ashok Dalwai when he said that the impact on human society and India at a time when we are going through very bitter, tough times, and here nobody is spared, an intellectual or a great filmmaker. Only filmmakers are, to a large extent, protected, or they are being cared by the whole society because they don't belong to any party as such. That is good. But here we are going through a very tough time in India, and at this time, what your films, what do you have to say? The kind of impact, whether on the political parties or the political or the governors, in the sense the administrators of the government. Because everybody likes films. Many of them, many politicians, many of the bureaucrats and all that, they have been, seeing the films since their childhood, since their adulthood. So, what is your idea of an impact? Like, what kind of an impact it can make? I'm not saying on the whole of the society, on the whole of the country, but at least larger sections of the people, uh, what impact it can make.
Well, the impact is obviously huge because you see today media is audiovisual, and most of our politicians are seen in this media, and people who know how to use this particular medium well. And one of the people who knows how to use this medium extremely well is our Prime Minister. He uses it extremely well. Some of the secret of his success has to be attributed to his audiovisual persona. Because the ability to use the audiovisual medium well is very important for a politician. Very, very few people know how to use it well. Some people did it quite naturally. There was a time when, for instance, certain kinds of politicians used it very easily without it, as they owned it, as though they owned it. Similarly, our present Prime Minister knows how to use it. But there aren't too many people other than that, who know how to use the medium well. Because you have to understand that the audiovisual medium is of that kind. And this ability is a very important ability because the medium does it also. It contributes to it. You see, it contributes. It is, and that I think is something that we have to understand from the very beginning, which is why I keep saying that you must have this as an subject of study from the time you go to school and college. It's very important. Very few people realize that.
Right. Yeah. You have seen the Mahabharata by Stanley Kubrick. By this who lives in France now. He made this film. Yeah. I saw it. Yeah.
Well,
I like the film.
It was really a theatrical production. It was a huge theatrical production, brilliantly done, and it was written brilliantly also. The script of that is outstanding. It's an outstanding script and a very well produced theatrical production, which was eventually put on cinema as well.
Yeah, because when you were talking to Satyajit Ray, and he told you that he was thinking of making a film on Mahabharata, but characters only through playing that game, playing the playing the chart or the pet game. Through that, he wanted to make a film. I don't know. He was able to make later. I don't know whether it was.
No, he did.
But it was
because he had a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
But we have all done something or the other. You see, Bharat Records, I did the Mahabharata myself. I did the two episodes of Mahabharata and 2 episodes of Ramayana.
Did you ever feel like making a film? Sorry.
Yes, carry on.
I wanted to know, since you have shown beautiful landscapes in many of your films, including Ankur, remarkable locations there. Now we don't see such locations after 25, 30 years or 40 years. And I'm sure you are conversant with what's happening with the climate change. The world is going through a lot of upheavals, like China, Greece, Germany, Turkey, all these countries. And recently in Africa, crores of people are trying to find water and food also because of the climate change. It has wiped out all the topsoil vegetation. You have any ideas of making a film on this future of the environment of the world in the sense, whatever you have. Do you ever entertain this idea?
Well, one is affected by it, whether you like it or not. Because, the process of desertification that is happening in some parts of India, that and then the places where you have this unusual amounts of rain, flooding, and so on.
Right.
There are changes of these kinds that are taking place.
Yeah.
And these are changes that must concern us because, they're affecting us in a very serious way, the environmental changes. So environment itself becomes a very important subject to deal with. So one of the things I think is to deal with this in the audiovisual media very seriously. This hasn't been done. Not too much work has been done in this. And I think filmmakers must take it up. And I certainly am very interested and would like to do something in this area, particularly relating to the process of desertification in some parts of India, because it's a very serious matter. And similarly, this matter of constant flooding in certain parts of the country, because of this, the destruction of forests, the manner in which it is happening, all of these things, So because it concerns not it's a small, it's a big concern. It's a concern that takes everybody into it, and people are not sensitive enough to understand this, or rather the business interests, the economy, and the whole process of which the manner in which we are functioning. You have to, because it requires to think in terms that are macro as well as micro. It's not just a question of thinking that it's happening here, not happening there. It's happening everywhere. And it's happening in a way that people don't realize, and we are walking into it with our eyes closed.
Right. Yeah. When is your this recent film which you have made on Mujibur Rahman? I mean, when will it be out?
Well,
in the sense,
I hope
will it take months or?
We should be able to release it sometime during the course of this year, because I've finished shooting the film. I'm editing it at the moment. There are some special effects that have to be done that are being carried on. And we are hoping that we should have the film ready for release sometime in the course of this year. Because it's very important. It's an important film for Bangladesh, and it's also very important, I think, for us. Because, he was an extraordinary person. And his life has many, there are many lessons to learn from his life. So I think it's something that has fascinated me enormously while making the film. I didn't know too much about him before that, except for the fact that the tragedy that befell that family, because, he, not only was he assassinated, but his wife and his sons and his daughters-in-law, they were all assassinated, except for the present Prime Minister and his sister, who were the daughters of Sheikh Mujib. The rest of the family was wiped out. And, so it's a huge tragedy. It's like a Greek or Shakespearean tragedy. So it's something that I've been most fascinated, not only fascinated, but also much affected, even while I was making the film. So I'm hoping that the film will be ready soon, working very hard on it. And so I was working while you wanted to talk to me this afternoon, as a matter. So anyway, hopefully it should be ready and we should have it seen all over the country as well.
Yeah. I would like to ask you about the growth of technologies. And which come into the narrative. Whether the technology will play any part in making great films. For instance, I saw that Avatar, James Cameron's. I liked it because he brought a lot of environmental issues, how the indigenous people survive. They fight with the people who come with huge machines and all that, destroying the forest, putting across the fires on fire. These local people, they destroy the whole machines. They destroy the people who built it ultimately. So, and today's films that we sometimes see, the American films and all that, they use a lot of technologies. People come from sky, suddenly they jump on but they don't seem to make any impact.
Well,
like the stories which have been told well. Like the filmmakers who make the beautiful stories, which do not using more technology, they make an impact. This is my individual, feeling, my opinion. I would like your expert opinion on this. Whether technology is like, okay, technology in editing, technology maybe different formats of camera, and then from negative films to arts, the art we have gone to digital. That's okay, but then the narrative itself has to be there. It has to be told strongly. It has to be put across with a lot of good and solid message. Then only people perhaps will like the films. This is my feeling. I would like you to kindly give your ideas on this. Whether technology will be really prominent with filmmakers of future.
Well, technology we require
like animation.
We need to develop our technologies. There's no question about it. But it's a very simple thing. Whether technology will control us or we will control the technology. You see, the fear has always been, some of these films you mentioned, Avatar and so on and so forth, films like that. They were H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds and films, not just a long time ago as well. Now, when you look at all of that, you will find that whether technology can be controlled by us or will technology control us? The question is that. Now, we should be in control of technology. Now, because the development, the growth and the development, evolution and the manner in which technology is growing and adding ability to us, because it's extending our own ability. But while it is extending our ability to do the kind of things we never could do in the past, that is one. But on the other hand, we are also at the same time being controlled by that technology. It's a question of we should not allow ourselves to be controlled by the technology. We have to find a balance. That we have yet to do, because we get so fascinated by the technologies that are developing that we might become slave to the technologies. That is the thing. So it goes into the realm, into a philosophical realm as well. The fact is that do we control it or will technology control us? This becomes a kind of conundrum after a while,
Right.